Well, the walk of faith, the Christian life, the journey through this world, is indeed a challenging one. Throughout these weeks, what we have been doing in the series I've been talking about is to look at a series called By Faith Alone. Our Bible reading has been taken from Hebrews chapter 11, an incredible statement, a chronology, a picture, a panorama of the story of ordinary people's lives, men and women, young people just like you and me, except that they lived thousands of years ago. They lived in an age where there was no electricity, no gas, no running water apart from what you had from a stream or a river. And these men and women had to live by faith alone. They did not have the Bible that we now have. They didn't have organized church. They didn't have that kind of worship. They lived in their families. They lived in tents. They were traveling people. They lived in towns and then later in cities. And these were people who had to experience ordinary life and the pressures of life, but to find God in all of that. So today, our fourth talk, is about a couple, about Abraham and Sarah, the couple who believed God for the impossible. Now, many of us are familiar with the story of Abraham. His original name was Abram. God gave him the name Abraham, which means father of many, or exalted one, or exalted father, or father of a multitude. And Sarah, who was called Sarai, who became Sarah, and her name means princess or noble woman. Lovely names. God renames us with the things that he says we will be. But theirs is an interesting story. It goes over many years. And I wonder, when you think about the story of Abraham and Sarah, what you think about. You think about a man who was called by God to go from where he was, comfortable with his family, to a place he knew nothing at all about. A man who had to struggle with that. A man who had to struggle because God gave him promises and he could not see the promises being fulfilled. A man and a woman who were quite elderly when their promises were given and when God called them. Sometimes we feel that time has passed us by. We say, what has happened to all the years of our lives? We wish we could have them back, but there they were, quite elderly people, and God called them. They're people who, to some degree, believed and some degree doubted. They're people who tried to take things into their own hands. They are people who were faced with the ultimate sacrifice. Abraham was called to sacrifice his son. They're people who had to live with death because they lived very long lives, and Abraham eventually had to bury his wife, and then he lived for many years after as a widower, although he remarried. Many different aspects of the story of Abraham and Sarah, very similar in some respects to ours. Well, I will bring some of those things out today, and in my next talk, I will follow up because the writer to the Hebrews not only talks about the bit I'm talking about today, about how they believe God for the impossible, but there's a bit more of the story of Abraham. So this will be a story in two parts. And today, I want to bring out 4 separate points. The first will be about God's call to Abraham, God's promises to Abraham, and Abraham's response, the way Abraham responded to God. I want to talk also about Abraham's journey. Abraham's journey was a physical journey. It was also the journey of his life. And it's so much like our journey through life that I want to talk about wavering faith, because we often think about the people in the Bible as people who had great faith, and we think we could never be like that. But we'll talk about how Abraham and Sarah's faith wavered. And I want to encourage you in that, to know that even when our faith is wavering, God is with us. God is there to strengthen us. God is there to hold us by his mighty hand. And finally, I want to talk about an eternal perspective, how Abraham's life was lived in the light of eternity. He did all the things that he had to do as a man of his time. He was a nomad. He was a traveling man with his family. They lived out in the open. Sometimes they were in the desert. Sometimes they were in lush places. That was the nature of his life. But through it all, he had an eternal perspective. He was looking down the corridor of time. He was seeing eternity. And we'll see how you and I can live like that. When we do, our lives change. When we look at what's happening now from the perspective of what will happen in the future, in the world that is to come, in the world that will never pass away, then we begin to see things from a different viewpoint. So first of all, God's call to Abraham, God's promises, and Abraham's response. To understand this, we need to know a little bit about Abraham himself. We calculate that Abraham lived somewhere around about 2000 BC, what historians would call the Iron Age. You all remember your history at school. You were told about the different ages of human beings. So the Iron Age was when people began to use tools of iron. So they'd become fairly advanced. Not a great deal, by the way, was happening in this part of the world. If there were human beings in Europe, they would have been very savage-like people. Not too different from the way they are today, we might say. But the cradle of civilization was in the Near East and in the Middle East. Abraham's father was a man whose name is spelled T-E-R-A-H. And my wife thinks you say Terah, but I don't think. I would say Tira, because Terah means, "Arr!" And I don't think Abraham's father had that effect on his children. Who knows? But Abraham's father was a man called Terah, and his spiritual background was that he was a heathen, he was a pagan. He was a worshipper of other gods. And we know that because Joshua, in Joshua chapter 22 and verse 4, describes how Abraham's father Terah lived on the other side of the river, which is that great river Euphrates, and he worshipped other gods. Now, you may remember I've been talking about the great patriarchs from Adam onwards. Abraham was descended from one of the sons of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Abraham was descended from Shem. He lived 5 generations after Shem had been born. Shem himself would have lived 150 years after Abraham was born. Isn't that interesting? Now, why that is so important is that people say, how can you believe all this is true? It is because in the ancient world, people lived much longer periods of time than we do now. The gene pool had not been corrupted as it is today. So people were a lot healthier. The world was a lot healthier. The air was a lot purer. Life was more organic. You know, when you killed an animal to eat it, which is what you were permitted to do, you knew you were eating good, solid stuff, and you were taking it into yourself. And these people lived a long period of time, and they were able to pass on the stories that they knew, their actual experience, to people, to their sons and daughters. It's a bit like Bethlehem today. I have no doubt whatsoever that the place in Bethlehem, which you can go and visit, some of you have been there, where they say Jesus was born, is the place Jesus was born. The reason for this is quite simply that for hundreds of years after Jesus was born, people would say, well, that's where he was born. They would just talk about it, just as we know about something. People know Brook House, this building is here. And you might tell your children and your children's children, and in 200 years, if this building is no longer here, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, it was there. That's where they used to meet. And in the same way, we know about these stories in the Bible. We know that they are true. We know that they are verified because of oral tradition, which is now written down. And so Abraham would have known about things. They would have known about the flood. Every ancient civilization has a recollection of a great flood. Some of them are a bit mixed up, but we don't hold that against them. The simple fact is that in the minds of ancient people, they knew about these things. Over the years, they get corrupted because people mix them up with other views and thoughts, just like the Christian gospel. You know, I mentioned baptism earlier. Baptism in the Bible, in the early church, was full immersion in water. Over a period of time, people mix that up with their ideas, often for very good reasons, and then develop their own other thoughts, which are now the rituals of religious practice in churches. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just trying to explain that's what happens. It helps us to understand truth, because truth is not relative. Truth is absolute. Truth is truth. It is not gray. It is either black or it is white. And God tells us the truth. And the Bible, I keep looking there because I'm looking for my Bible. It's over there. The Bible is a book of truth, and we can believe it. It may be difficult to understand. It is difficult to understand, but it is a book of truth. So Abraham's father was a worshipper of foreign gods. Abraham was born in a place called Ur. That's not something you say when you can't think of something. It's U-R, Ur of the Chaldees. And this is located in what we would call today southern Iraq. I'll show you a map in a minute. So that's where he was born, in Ur of the Chaldees. And he had brothers. He had two brothers, a brother called Nahor and a brother called Haran. And he had a wife, who we know, who's called Sarah, and he had a nephew. His nephew's name was Lot. Lot, L-O-T. It's nice, isn't it? The Bible sometimes has really long names, which you can't pronounce, and then you get one which is made of 3 letters, Lot. And it's an unusual name, isn't it? Because it means a great deal, and it's only made of 3 letters. So the Bible is also, it's almost as though God has, he spikes the Bible with little bits of humor. And he said, I'll call him Lot, because it means a lot, and it's only little in terms of letters. So the Bible is a lovely little book to read, lovely, great book to read. So Terah and his family set off on a journey. I'll talk about the journey in a minute. And he's off there with his 3 sons, and they go to a place called Haran. Now, what were the names of his 3 sons? Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And they go to a place which is called Haran. So the Bible is also very interesting. You must not get confused. The Bible sometimes has places which are called a certain thing, and then you get people who are called it. It's like if my name was London and I lived in London. And it's very confusing. So Haran is one of the boys that Terah takes with him, and they go to live in a place called Haran. Sadly, Haran dies in Haran. Now, you'll remember this, won't you? I'm trying to give you a Bible lesson as well, so you remember some of the facts of the Bible. They're not that difficult. And Haran, they have children, and I'll tell you about the story of their children and how they get married on another occasion. But they journey. And this is what the Lord had said to Abraham. His name, by the way, was Abram at the time. God had already spoken to Abram. He was traveling with his father. We don't know when God had spoken to Abraham, but they go as far as Haran. They don't complete the journey. And in Haran, that's where his father dies as well. But the Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is amazing. This is incredible. This is fantastic. Abraham is a worshipper of other gods. They have discovered these great pyramids, which are called ziggurats, because these people were worshipping the sun and the moon and other things. It was a practice that had descended sometime after the flood, when people, again, they showed, even though God had destroyed the world with the flood, and we talked about Noah last time, they knew about the truth, but they left the truth. That's what's in our hearts, folks, all the time. Our hearts are always going after the false thing. And the devil will try and deceive you. He will try and take you in the wrong direction. Sometimes the wrong direction can be along the right direction. That was what happened to Abraham. God had said, come out. He went with his father. They went part of the way, and they stopped. Have you gone part of the way and stopped? Have you gone part of the way with God and said, oh, that's as far as I want to go, God. Oh, no, that's far too close for me now. Now you're making me uncomfortable. Now you're asking me, baptism in water? Oh, you must be joking. I'm never going to go there. I don't want to put you under pressure. The Bible says that, all right? That's the point. And God will make you uncomfortable because sin has made God uncomfortable. It made him uncomfortable on the cross. He had to die for us. That's how bad sin is. And so you think God can't come to you and twist your collar a bit and say, come on, wake up, wakey. Sin is around. The darkness is dark. It's coming on this world, even worse than it is at the moment. Put your life in order. Get your life sorted out. Follow me 100%, not 2%. And so God says to Abraham, I want you to come and walk with me. I want you to spend your life with me. Abraham goes part of the way. See, God called Abraham very specifically. God calls you specifically. He knows your name. He knows your needs. He knows your aspirations, and He knows your heart. He knows what your past has been all about, and He cares for you despite your past. He can heal your past. He can heal your past. He can cleanse your past memories. He can resolve the things that are deeply rooted in your life. He can take the root of bitterness out of your life so that the things that were done to you, you no longer feel that you hold something against those people. God required Abraham, though, to take a step of faith. And the step of faith was a big ask. Leave your country, leave your family, come out into the unknown, a place you do not know about, and I will show you what I'm going to show you. And Abraham's response is spoken of in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 8. The Bible tells us, and we have just heard it read, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed. He went out even though he did not know where he was going. He had no idea, not a clue. It was a journey of 1,500 miles, nearly 2,500 kilometers. He went from southern Iraq, that's where he went with his father, up to Turkey. That's where Haran was. And there's no dispute about this place, Haran. It still exists today. And that is where his dad died. And then, as we'll see in the scripture, God continued to speak to Abraham. And then he began to make his way down. Now, we are covering many years. In a little while, I'll show you a little bit of a timeline to help you to understand the years that passed. Because you may sometimes, and I may be thinking, I wish everything could happen suddenly. It doesn't always happen suddenly. This church, for example, this is a small church which we are building. Don't worry about the numbers. Let's pray that God will add the numbers. But keep coming. Little by little, we will grow, and we will have an impact on the community around us. Can we do it? Absolutely. God will do this for us. But the walk of faith is a walk of patience. It's a walk of perseverance. It's step by step, one step at a time. So Abraham goes to, because he's a herdsman, and he has here sheep and goats and cows and all the animals that you'd expect them to have, and they're grazing. And then there's a famine in the land, in the area where they are in Palestine. So he goes down to Egypt. And I'll talk to you about Egypt in just a minute. But here are some things to bear in mind. That God was the one who chose the relationship with Abraham, and yet Abraham did not fully obey God. Yet, despite all of this, God's promise was not dependent on Abraham's obedience. That's important to know. God is not promising something to you in the hope that you might obey. He promises because he loves you. And he loved Abraham, and he loves this world, because out of Abraham's family would come the Messiah, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, to die for our salvation. But even though his promise is not dependent on whether you and I obey, the outcome is. We determine the outcome of our lives. We have to choose. And we can only choose for God or not for God, for Christ or not for Christ. That is the choice. And complete obedience is costly. I have to tell you that again and again and again. You are most welcome to come to Daybreak Community Church. However, if you really want to follow Jesus Christ, there is a price to be paid. And the ultimate price is the price of giving up your own will. And I want to urge you and ask you, for some of us, our will is like granite. It's like we're holding on like that. Listen, God's hand is very strong. Don't leave it so that God has to prise your fingers open around your will, because that is a painful process. It is far better that you just come and say, have it all, Lord. I give it all to you. Are you prepared to do that today? Are you prepared to say, I am just going to give it all to you? If you do that, you'll find your life is absolutely transformed. Abraham did make mistakes. We make mistakes. But God came through for him in the end. So, how do you know when God is leading you to do something? Do you know that? Are you used to hearing his voice? What would be the hardest thing for you to leave behind? And why would that be hard? Just think about these things when you are on your own. Would you be willing and able, if God asked you to step out of your comfort zone in a step of faith? I've talked about that today. I've talked about baptism by immersion in water. I've talked about commitment to Daybreak Community Church. These are all tough things. I was 14 and a half, as you know, when I answered the call of God to follow him. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no one else worth following. And I just want to encourage every one of us to get off our hindquarters and follow God. All right? When Jesus was calling his disciples, he came to them one after the other. He came to Matthew, who was a tax collector, a hated man. And the Bible tells us that as soon as Matthew saw Jesus, heard him, he got up, he just left it all, and he followed him. Are you prepared to follow Jesus Christ? He gave up everything for you and for me. And the least we can do is to give him everything and say, Lord, I want to follow you. I want to serve you. I want to love you all the days of my life, even though it cuts across my will, even though it cuts across my religious beliefs. The hardest job Jesus ever had was convincing religious people about who he was. And he's still having a struggle today. You go to many churches, if Jesus walked in, they wouldn't recognize him. If he got up to preach, they'd say, oh, he sounds a bit like that bloke Chan Abraham. And they might give us the same kind of treatment. So what would enable you to follow God and obey him wholeheartedly? Well, the Holy Spirit will help you to do that. When we step out to follow the Lord, to follow the way he leads us, all that matters is that God knows the path he's taking us along. We just need to keep our hand in his hand so that we will not lose our way. Never let go of the hand of God. If you do that, you'll lose your way. He'll wait for you at the place you let go of his hand. He's not going to go anywhere. He loves you too much. You have to go back and get hold of his hand again. We have to make plans, all right? We make plans praying and committing them to the Lord, but it's God who is directing our steps. When God calls us to step out in faith and to follow him, even into unknown and unfamiliar territory, he is asking us to trust him one step at a time. Don't worry about the fact that you don't know what will happen 3 steps along the way. Some of us like to be so much in control that we don't give up control of our lives because we feel we don't know what's going to happen. Don't worry about that. This morning, I was encouraging you to pray out loud as we were praying together. I want to encourage you to do that more and more, because as you pray out loud, as you speak, unless you are a dumb person, physically dumb, and you cannot speak, you should be able, if you are a Christian, to speak words to God out loud. Certainly when you're on your own, when you're with your partner, husband, wife, brother, sister, and also when we're in the church together. I know it's not easy, but don't worry. It's the sort of thing we can grow into, one step at a time. All right? That's the way we're doing it in Daybreak. So we come on to our second point then about Abraham's journey, which, as we've said, was a very long one. 1,500 miles, when it is all on foot, is quite a long distance. And Abraham's journey, once they'd been in the land of promise for a while, took him to Egypt because there was a famine. And this is where things go a bit wrong for Abraham. Because although I can't go into the detail of it, he makes some very naughty decisions. One of those is that he says to his wife, Sarah, you are a bit of a babe, and I think that the Egyptian boss, Pharaoh, is going to fancy you. So this is English vernacular. So he's saying, she's beautiful, the king of Egypt is going to want you as his own woman. So why don't you say you are my sister? Abraham does this twice. He does it somewhere else as well. And things go very badly wrong because Abraham's wife is taken into Pharaoh's harem. He doesn't touch her because they all become ill. Because God is with Abraham. God has said Sarah is going to have a baby. Sarah is older than any of the ladies who are here today. She is not a vixen. Okay, she's a young lady, an old lady. And so she must have been pretty good looking for the Pharaoh to fancy her. So that's telling us something about it. So Middle Eastern creams and facial creams of 2000 BC must have been incredible. Imagine if we just had a bit of that to put on our faces today, ladies. Oh. And it was all around you, you see. That was the thing. So wouldn't it be great to travel back in time and have the complexion of Sarah from the Middle East in 2000 BC? We could bottle that, actually. We could call it Sarah's lotion, circa 2000 BC. That would be great. Anyway, she's fancied by the king of Egypt, and things go badly wrong, and God says, naughty boy, Abraham, you shouldn't have done this. There are other things happening, because we've talked about his nephew, who's got a very short name that means a lot of things, his nephew Lot. God said to Abraham, I want you to come, and I'm going to make you I'll make you into a great nation. Well, actually, he calls Lot to come with him. Because Abraham and Sarah have no children, Lot would be his heir, because he was his nephew. So Abraham is thinking, right, okay, I've got to work this out now. God has told me I'm going to do this, 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 and this. So, okay, I'm going to take Lot with me, and Lot will be my heir. Wrong, Abraham, wrong. Because when they get to the land of promise, there's a big fight between Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's. They all have sheep and cattle, and they begin to fight with each other. So Abraham calls his nephew. He says, look, we're not going to have this. You tell me exactly where you want to go, and you can take that part of the country, and I'll go somewhere else. And so Lot looks out, and he sees what's called the cities of the plain, and that's where Sodom and Gomorrah and other cities are, and it's lovely and fertile and lush. So he says, I'll go there, uncle. And Abraham says, that's fine, I'll go somewhere else. So they separate. And of course, the story about Sodom and Gomorrah is a very interesting one. We'll cover that at some point. So things are not really going too well for Abraham. He's gotten in trouble in Egypt. He's had problems, family problems, with Lot, who's his family. But one thing that Abraham does that is correct is he establishes blood sacrifice and the covenant. Well, God tells him to do that. Because right from the beginning, people have known the only way to approach God is by the sacrifice of an animal, the shedding of its blood, so that we can come to God. And we know the story of Cain and Abel. That was the first story I gave you. And so Abraham institutes this, and God says, and God gives him another promise. God is great. He's meeting with him again and again. He takes Abraham out into the starry sky. We see some wonderful stars around here because there's not too much light pollution. But out there, when there would be none, he would have seen the night sky. And God says to him, my son, look now toward heaven. Tell the stars if you are able to number them. And God says to him, so shall your seed be. So shall your descendants be. That's amazing. When God promises, he doesn't promise small. He promises big. Can you imagine? Abraham is out there. He's looking at the night sky. And God says, if you can number them, that's how many descendants you're going to have. And he's not only talking about the physical people of Israel, of course. The New Testament shows us that he's talking about all of those who will be saved. So God made a covenant with Abraham in the face of all the questions that Abraham was asking him. He confirmed his promises that Abraham would have land, he would have descendants, and there would be blessing on all people. We are often faced with uncertainty because we don't know how things will work out. But God's covenant with us, his contract, his commitment, his promises have been made certain in the blood of Christ. Because Jesus died on the cross, that is God's absolute guarantee that his hand will never let go of yours, provided you trust him. My job as a Christian teacher is to help you to know the truth. I have no other reason for telling you what I tell you except that I know it to be true. And how do I know it to be true? It's because it's been with me all through my life. And God has kept me and saved me and brought me through. And I want to encourage you that the same God who's been faithful to me, he will be faithful to you because his son died on the cross. God's covenant is certain. And God says to Abraham, can you believe? Can you believe this? And we're told that Abraham believed in the Lord and God reckoned it to him. He computed it. He did the arithmetic as though he was a righteous man. This is the point at which Abraham was saved. This is the point at which he became a true believer. Because God said, I'm going to do this. And God says, okay, you're a righteous man. Elsewhere in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the book of Romans, we're told that Abraham's faith was accounted to him as his righteousness. And so, even though we may waver through our lives, as Abraham did, we know that God is with us. Because when God said that to him, Abraham actually laughed. So in what areas is your faith weak? How do you respond when your faith begins to waver? Andrew Murray, a Christian of another generation, said, the measure of our prayer is the measure of our power. And that's why we want to encourage you to be a praying person, and we want this to be a praying church, where we're constantly talking to God, where it's raising up our needs, our concerns, and our praise to him. Whatever area your faith is weak, respond by praying, asking God, and you'll find that you'll get stronger. It's just like when you're in the gym, when you're exercising. If you want to make those muscles stronger, you have to target them, and that can often be difficult. So our third point is about wavering faith, trusting God, not taking matters into our own hands. The years pass, and no child comes. Abraham is 75 years old when God calls him. And when he gets to the age of 85, still no baby. Not surprising, because he's no spring chicken, and nor is his wife. And so Sarah says to him, look, I've got this maid of mine, her name is Hagar. Let's have a baby through her. Now, this was very normal practice in the Near East. Can I just tell you this? It was not unusual. It's perfectly proper, normal, customary activities. But just because something is the way the world does it, doesn't mean to say that's the way God will do it. God has his own ways, and we have to trust him to do his will the way he wants to do it. And so, sure enough, there is a baby. His name is Ishmael. He becomes the father of the modern Arab nations. And there is trouble, and there has been trouble ever since. But he's nevertheless still a favored son of Abraham, and God says, I will bless him still, nevertheless. So let's just think about what happened, because if we can understand this, we'll understand that Abraham was struggling. All the references, by the way, are here in the Bible. So God comes to him. He came to him when he was 75. He came to him when he was 85. When he was 86, Ishmael is born. And then God comes to him on his 99th birthday. How about that, Eric? 99. Eric's only a mere 91. That's right. He comes along and he says, Abraham, I'm still here, my boy. And Abraham has been faithfully pursuing God. He's been walking through the desert. He's been looking after sheep. He's become a very mighty prince now. He's a very, very, very wealthy man, very well respected in his in the country in which he's living. And God comes to him. And God now says to him, okay, get ready, get ready. God keeps us waiting. Why does he keep us waiting? I don't know. But when he comes and he says, get ready, because he says, Abraham, you are no longer Abram. That was his name. Your name is now Abraham, exalted father, father of a multitude, father of nations. Your wife is no longer Sarai. Her name is Sarah, noblewoman, princess. You are going to have a baby. It gives him a new name. Abraham laughs. Abraham laughs. Abraham, wouldn't you laugh after all this time? You're waiting nearly 25 years. And things aren't what they used to be. Abraham knew. He's a bit of an old man now, an older man, shall I say, because he lived quite a bit longer than that. And at the same time, not at the same time, shortly afterwards, God speaks to Sarah as well. And, he speaks to Abraham, and Sarah's listening. And when Sarah hears it, she's in another part of the tent, she laughs. She doesn't laugh out loud. She laughs in her heart. And God says to her, you laughed. She said, I didn't laugh. He said, you did laugh. And this little conversation takes place in the scripture. It's wonderful. It's so entertaining. And he says to her, in 1 year's time, you will have a baby. The laugh of incredulity is, we just say, it can't happen. Do you laugh about what God says? People laugh about what God says. They say it will never happen. I could give you some stories which would amaze you. The very building you are sitting in today is something people laughed at. They didn't just laugh at the building, they laughed at the idea that what created this building would ever happen. God has his own way of doing things. Don't ever laugh. If God speaks to you or God speaks to someone else, take him at his word. And despite their laughing at what he was saying, God included them in his list of faith people. So I want to encourage you, just because you think you may have fouled up, it doesn't mean it's the end. You have to wait on God, and you have to wait for God. Here's the timeline. When God called him, he was 75 years old. When Sarah gave Hagar to him as his wife, he was 85. When Hagar had the baby Ishmael, he was 86. And when God revisited him, changed his name, established the covenant of circumcision, to say you're going to be set apart from me, he was 99 years old. And when Isaac was born, he was 100 years old. That's what the Bible tells us. That was a long wait, 25 years. But God came through for them. God's timing, folks, is perfect. He's never too late. Do not give up because God has not answered yet. Trust his timing. The period of time that we wait for God is sometimes proportional to how much we trust him. The more you trust him, the longer you might have to wait. The more you trust him, the better, the easier the waiting can be. And the longer the waiting, the more your faith will grow. It's not an easy road, the road of faith. It would be nice if we could have all our answers straight away, but the process of growing in faith is so difficult. But don't worry. Many people have done it before, and we're all still doing it. And the great thing about church is that we can help each other. We can support one another through that, which takes us on to our fourth and final point, which is about an eternal perspective. You see, Abraham saw himself as an alien or a foreigner in the land of promise. He was an outsider. He'd come 1,500 miles to be where God wanted him to be. Something like that happened to my own dad. Now, you know my surname is Abraham. And my father's name was Abraham as well. His name was Joseph Abraham, actually. And his father's name, how about this? They liked the Bible names in their time. His father's name was Moses Abednego Abraham. How about that? And he was Sri Lankan, Ceylonese. In 1962, my father, another Abraham, felt that God was calling him to come to Britain, just like he's called you to come to Britain. He had a purpose. He came over with 7 children. Actually, we came over in 2 separate boats. One group came in April 1963. I came in September 1963. And it was a very cold winter. It followed the very cold winter, the coldest on record, of 1962. So it was a bit of a shock to our little Sri Lankan frames as we were shivering there. And I was constantly looking for my banyan or my vest in order to clothe myself. So we came over, but here you sit in a church. Some of you are in homes owned by a certain organization that has come about because one man, 50-something years ago, believed God, brought his 7 children over, and his youngest son was able to do what he has done so that you can be here today. That is God at work. That is God promising, God working. It's God who directs, and that's why we need an eternal perspective. So I'm a foreigner. I'm a sort of a naturalized foreigner, but I still am a foreigner. But we are all foreigners in this world if we are Christians, because this world is not our own. It's not our home. We're just a passing through. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Google the tune on that, you'll hear it. It's a great song. Abraham had an eternal perspective. He was looking for somewhere else. He was a foreigner. And so he lived by faith all that time. Only some of the promises were fulfilled before he died. He had the baby, but he didn't have the great nation. And he didn't have full possession of the land. He didn't see all of these descendants. We will get some of the promises here. We will get all of the promises when we get to glory. And while we're in this world, we need to balance making this world our home, in a sense, but also remembering it's not our permanent home. We have our homes, and we look after our homes, we decorate them, we repair them, we modernize them. But don't fall in love with your home. Don't fall in love with your possessions. You know, they say that an Englishman's home is his castle. Well, that's good in one sense. But if you are an Englishman, and I'm not a natural-born Englishman, guard against that, because there could be something of the spirit in there. I don't mean the Holy Spirit, but of the spirit of this world, where we sink all of our hopes and faith into bricks and mortar. And that's where our confidence is. Don't put your confidence there. Hold the things you have lightly. Don't hold them like that. Hold them like that, so that when you have to give them up and go, it will be an easy exit. If you have an internal perspective, it's what will characterize your life. It will change the way you look at everything you do. So that brings us to the end of our talk today on faith alone, about Abraham and Sarah, who were the couple who believed God for the impossible. Our 4 points have been about God's call to Abraham, his promises, and Abraham's response. We've looked at Abraham's journey, which was a difficult one, and it was the journey of his life. We've looked at how Abraham and Sarah's faith did waver, but God still came through for them. And we've looked at how God gave Abraham an eternal perspective. He saw what could not be seen, and he longed for the world to come. In closing, let me just say this, that impossible situations in our lives cause us to exercise our faith. So if you are going through a struggle of any kind at the moment, please don't let that bring you down. Don't let that bog you down. Know that God is with you in that, and absolutely with you, and he's going to help you. He's going to exercise your faith through this, and through it all, he's going to bring you to a place of greater strength. May the Lord strengthen us all as we go forward into the years and the days ahead. Amen.